you to think about, when we think about, what are we looking at? What are we looking for? One of the things that you can remember, one of the mnemonic devices that you can remember is SOLID. SOLID stands for syntax, organization, level of language, imagery, diction, and details. Now, the thing that I always try to emphasize to my students, if we go through and I give them, maybe a graphic organizer or something, one of the things that maybe they get a little tripped up on, and maybe you're getting a little tripped up on it right even from the jump here. You don't necessarily need to be finding all of these things. In fact, maybe you don't even necessarily need to find any of these things. What we want to be aware of is that these are the sorts of things that you're looking for. And so let's talk about what they are. I suspect that you are aware of some of these. Maybe I'll say it, hopefully I'll say it in a way that's different than your teacher has said it already, though I suspect your teacher has in fact said it. Let's talk about syntax. Syntax I think is one of, I don't want to say it's the most important, I don't want to say it's my favorite, I just think it's something that you end up talking about anyway in any piece of writing that you're looking at all. Anything that you notice, you are likely noticing it because of syntax. Let's pause and really understand what syntax is in particular. In general, it's not just the order of words, it's the order of words including punctuation. So when you're looking at something quickly, you want to notice interesting punctuation. So maybe it's parentheses, maybe it's an em dash, maybe it's a colon or a semicolon. Maybe it's just a really long sentence that looks like a run-on, and maybe in some cases it is a run-on, but you're noticing it and you're noticing that it's long and you're asking yourself why. I think about an author like William Faulkner who might be really writing really long sentences to engage vernacular, a style of writing in a unique to a certain place or time, vernacular. And so we want to just make sure that we are looking at any weird, and I just used an example of a really long sentence. Maybe you find also suddenly short sentences. All of that is important. So it's the order of words in a sentence, including punctuation, including length, including style. Everything that goes into that sentence falls under kind of the heading of syntax there. Organization is usually over the course of a full excerpt, a full text. I think about a really good example of bizarre organization is perhaps The Handmaid's Tale, which is as you sort of find out in the epilogue. So I'll try not to reveal too much if it's not something that you've read before and you intend to. It's something that the way the story has been organized is maybe not the way that the story was meant to be told. Obviously, that's a choice by Margaret Atwood. However the story is told is how the story is told. But there is something about a reliable or unreliable narrator that comes into question there. But so that's an example of writing over the course of a whole text, or that could impact the way the story is told, the way the story is organized. You're more than likely going to be thinking about a full excerpt because you have that text in front of you. The answers are right in front of you. So just thinking about, okay, what is the organization? What's the beginning, middle, and end of this full story? What's the beginning, middle, and end of this full excerpt? What can I take from this, and what is being revealed from the start of the excerpt to the end of the excerpt? I'll give an extra shout out, and I realize we're talking about fiction here tonight, but I'll give an extra shout out to that when it comes to poetry. You want to think about who the speaker is at the start of the poem, who the speaker is at the end of the poem, and what we learn about them along the way. But more than anything, those are the same questions you want to be asking yourself when it comes to various excerpts with fiction that you notice over the course of a test. taking a look at the level of language. Now, this is a place where my students get a little tripped up. You might be getting a little tripped up. That's okay. You want to be thinking about the level of language. Not is it high, low, medium, not is it good or bad language, but rather as it relates to the context around it. The language you hear at your high school graduation is going to be different than the language you use in your maybe graduation party, right? And the language you use, let's put it a different way, the language you use in a speech is different than the language you use in a text to your friend. And so context matters. Language that makes sense in a space might be too high for just talking with your friends, and it might be really it might even be too high even for a speech, a more formal occasion. So thinking about language rather that is I think a lot about the word slang, and this is a conversation. I'm trying to say this in a way that isn't just channeling my students in particular, but this is a conversation that I did have with a student in particular this week. Slang we tend to think of as when we use it just in our everyday, we think of it as language that is not formal. We think of it as language that is maybe even uneducated, but that's not what slang means. Slang is language that is casual. That's more important. You can have slang between like a governor and their aide. They might use really casual language together. Maybe they wouldn't use that in a speech. Maybe they would use it in a speech. Maybe there's some language that is colloquial that makes more sense to use in a speech to better convey some sort of whatever that meaning may be. But the thing that's important about slang is that it indicates familiarity. It indicates the fact that people are coming into a space where they both belong and they both are familiar and they both know each other. So there's a casualty to that, or a casualness to that. And so you want to make sure that you're recognizing that low level and high level language are not necessarily good or bad. They just indicate the space. Imagery we've talked about a lot, but I always like to talk about imagery as language that engages the senses and gives gradients. It shows small differences. Diction is word choice, strong words, odd words, words that not it and the and a, but thinking about words that that stand out to you because they are unique to a piece of writing, stand out to you because they're just what we might call a $2 word, a really, really good word. So be thinking there, and then details. Again, thinking back to what do we learn from the beginning to the end of this excerpt. What does it ultimately mean that we're reading this passage? Tonight in particular, we're going to look at syntax, level of language, diction, and details. You're going to see imagery. In terms of what we can offer you in this space, organization, I'll try to point out, but you'll see some you won't even necessarily need to look at organization on an excerpt too frequently outside of FRQ2, and so we'll take a look at that. We'll mention that a little bit later, but in particular I want to point out interesting syntax, interesting language, and interesting diction, and how it contributes to those details overall. The second thing I want to help for you, because I know a couple of people have asked about some tips for reading within the time, for working within the time, and for annotating within the time, be it on your FRQs or even on your multiple choice section. I also, and I'm going to specifically call out a student in our poetry unit 2, the poetry 1 course or cram last week. someone had asked about some tips related to the online version of the exam. I want to just take a moment to point out, and I had gone back and looked through this, really trying to find some specific tips and tricks for the online exam. Unlike some of the other content, the online and paper versions of the lit test are pretty much the same. It is what the AP is telling us. I had been looking for my own purposes and for my own class. The school that I'm at, we're going to be doing the paper exam, and so I've been focusing on that for my purposes. So I did go back and look in particular for fiveable purposes, and they are in fact the same. And so what I'll say to you there is to still make sure, have a piece of paper next to you, jot these things down, make your own organizers, the same way that you would on a workbook in particular. But I want to call out this slide in particular because for all of you, you want to be, if you're asking about how to work efficiently, this is one way. Now, you might call these the 5 S's of skimming, but I suspect that that's probably confusing and it might be hard to remember. So I've made up my own little acronym here. It doesn't mean anything, but I suspect you'll remember HYPIE, HYPIE. And so that's the second letter instead of just S. That's the second letter of each of these words here. So shift, syntax, speaker, situation, and sentences. These are things you can be looking at to help you try to recognize important details quickly when you're skimming through a text. This could be a poem. This could be an excerpt, a longer excerpt from a work of fiction. And I suspect in many cases you'd want to think about it in terms of fiction. You have poems are likely going to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more digestible, and you have some other things that can offer. So let's take a look at these quickly. Looking at H, shift. What's changing? And I know and again, I'll call back poetry quickly. I know in a poetry there are specific shifts that you want to call out, and you know that. But when it comes to a shift in a piece of fiction writing, what is changing, if anything? Is the point of view changing? Is the voice changing? Is there a change in mood or focus in the text? Is there something that you're learning a little bit more fully, maybe in the second half of the text that you didn't quite learn in the first half of the text? Is there something that you suspected that is then confirmed halfway through the text, if that might be it? Syntax, again, we just pointed out, can you find any of that syntax? Do you see that punctuation or longer words versus shorter words? Is there any variety in the writing style that you can point out? Who is speaking? The speaker is third. And as we've talked about in past crams, who are they as a character? What is their motivation? What are they bringing to this scene? What are they bringing to the excerpt? And more importantly, what is the scene? What is the excerpt? What is the plot that you're recognizing? Again, the test isn't just scrolling through whatever book they happen to grab and picking, and just like flipping open to page 109, pointing to a paragraph and saying that's going on the test. They have deliberately curated those excerpts for you. So what's the situation? What's the conflict and the motivation? What can you take from it? And then one of the ways, and I'll tell you, this is something that was pointed out to me 3 years ago. This type of quick reading structure. And I'll tell you, it's actually helped me to think through various excerpts as I'm talking to them with my students in general. What's the first sentence? What's the last sentence? And if you're asking yourself, well, how do we get from one to the other? As you scan through the rest of the paragraph, what's going on along the way? So in any given section, look at the first sentence, look at the last sentence. In any given paragraph, look at the first sentence, look at the last sentence. What's going on along the way? Now, before we get into this, we are obviously, we're about 20 minutes in here. I know I've thrown a lot at you. Just a quick recap. we're looking for solid. That's going to help us to scan. Again, all of these things, we're trying to work through any of these excerpts quickly, but efficiently. And efficiently means being able to move with speed, but purposeful speed. And so remembering things like solid, and remembering you don't need to know everything that's in that space, remembering these 5 S's, this HYPIE, can you move through a text in an efficient way? That's more important when it comes to what it is that you're reading, be it the multiple choice section or one of the FRQs. It's not about speed, it's about efficiency, because that's going to bring accuracy into it. And as always, remember, I'm trying to give you some tools to put in your toolbox, but more importantly, the test graders are trying to score you for what you do well. So these tools, they're just another way to help you to be able to show what you can do well.